In this video, I'm simply going to be talking about how to format text and numbers in Excel, and we'll also talk about dates, which are actually just numbers, and then we'll run over and take a look at autofill. So basically, we're going to be on the home ribbon, taking a look at this font group, the alignment group, and this number group. And I also want to talk a little bit about using styles over here. Now, before I start, let's talk a little bit about themes and the color palette. Obviously, if I want to change the color of the font or the fill of a cell, I run up here. This is the to fill a cell with a particular color, and if I want to change the font color, it's obviously right here. But what determines this color palette? Well, that's over here under page layout. Now right here I already have some pre-formatted data. If I run over here to themes and start moving my cursor, you can see that pre-formatted data changing pretty radically. So what themes are doing are changing the color palette and changing the fonts of the text. And so that's why you can see it bouncing around all over the place between different colors, and if you look here, it's got different fonts. If all you wanted to change was the color palette of the worksheet, but you weren't as concerned about fonts, well then right here is where you can just scroll through and get different color palettes. So let's say I prefer the yellow-orange one. I click on that. Now when I run to the home ribbon and hit this drop-down arrow, it's going to have that set of colors to choose from. So that's what the themes and the color palettes do for you. So let's move on to, I want to center text above the data just like this. What I do is I select the columns that the text is going to go into. And then there's a button right here called Merge and Center. Now, notice there's a drop down. So what Merge and Center does is actually two things. It merges this into one cell, and then it turns on that center button. So when I hit Merge and Center, notice that center button, the center alignment came on, and it made this one great big cell. You can tell when I select that cell and then select this, it's a ginormous cell. So here's the tricky part. I'm going to hit Control Z for undo. I want to merge and center both of these so it looks like this. Well, the problem is it would want to, if I click on that, merge both of those into a ginormous cell, and it goes, whoa, I'm going to have to overwrite a piece of text with this other piece of text. And you're like, no, that's not what I want. So in order to do both of these but keep them as separate rows, that's what Merge Across does. Merges selected cells in the same row into one large cell. But then notice what it does. So here we go, I merge across. I have one large cell there, one large cell there, but it didn't center. So now I have to go back and hit the center button myself. Not that big a deal, but that's what Merge Across does. Is if I want to merge several rows but keep them as individual rows, then I'll hit Merge Across. Obviously, Merge Cells merges them without the center, and then Unmerge unmerges them. So right here, now they're back to individual cells again. So I will grab both of these, select through K, I will merge across, and the center is already there. And now of course I could change the font, the size, I could increase and decrease the size of the font. But there are predefined cell styles, and if you hit this drop down arrow you can see them. And so for instance, maybe I'll select this first one, I might want to apply the title style. And then maybe on this second one I could apply, whoops, I just hit note accidentally. I could apply the notes or heading 1 style or heading 2. I need to turn off the note style, go back to normal. Oh boy, I hit it again. Go back to normal and then over here and hit the heading 1 style. Now it looks like I lost my centering, so I can put that back. Anyway, so just be aware of these styles. A lot of times I will use this total style. So for instance, on a total row like I have down here, I can select all of that, run over here, and it will automatically put in a single top border, a double bottom border, and that's what that looks like. So kind of handy in that it applies several formats at once, and you're not having to run through all of the different features up here on the font group. Now the next feature I want to show you is how to wrap text or put text on 2 lines. Whatever you do, so notice this says starting inventory here. Whatever you do is you don't want to put the word starting in one row and then the word inventory in a second row. This will create problems when you go to sort your data or do some features that we'll learn later in the quarter. So that's a mistake. There's basically two ways that we can wrap text. So let me get rid of this. One is you go ahead and type the word starting, and then you hit Alt-Enter, and that puts you onto another row, and then you can write inventory. So Alt-Enter is basically like a line break inside of a cell. So, and then you can hit Alt-Enter wherever you want. So right here, if I go inventory delivered, let me hit the backspace. If I hit Alt-Enter, it moves it down to another line. Okay, the other way to do it, let me put this all back on one line and I'll hit a space, is there's a feature here called wrap text. And so that will just, even though it's all on one line here, it will wrap the text. Now sometimes, like if I move this over, all of a sudden the G comes down, and so wrapping text, it may not perfectly wrap the way you want it to unless you kind of adjust the column width. So even here we're like, oh, that's not quite what I want. There we go. So that is the wrap text button. A lot of times you'll see I will grab an entire header row, if you will, of all the headings for the columns and just hit wrap text. And then I may have to go through and tweak a couple of the columns just to make it so it wraps the way I want it to. The next thing I'll mention while we're on this sheet, and we'll move to rotating text and talk a little bit about borders, and that is these two buttons are for indenting text. And a classic example of using that is, first I am going to auto fit this column. So I will double click and notice it auto fits to the largest thing, and then I'll do the same thing here. I'll run up to the border between the two columns and double click. So notice I have a heading called soda. A lot of times I may want to indent this text so it's a little bit in from the word soda, and that is the button right there that I do that. So I can hit this and basically indent that text. I indented twice. If you felt like you could do it here, now don't get indent confused with right align or left align, but it's just literally moving it in just one spot. Whereas if I click on this cell down here, notice that is right aligned. Okay, let's talk about rotating the text. This is actually an image, but I wanted to show you. See how I have this word wraps and soups and sides and salads, and then next to it, obviously, the different kinds of wraps and soups and sides and salads. So how did they do that? So if you run up, we already talked about the ability to merge cells. Well, that is, you don't have to always merge across. You can merge up and down like that. So I can select all that and hit. So you can merge in center, or in this case, maybe I'll just hit merge, and it makes it one large cell. So I can grab this one and hit merge, and it'll make it one large cell. Now, how did I get that text to look like that? You have a button right here for rotating the text all these different ways. So you can do it up, or you could do it down if you want to do it at some kind of angle. And so in this case, it looks like they did it so the word wraps heads up. So I can do that. Is that this way? And then it looks centered. And there's a vertical alignment. So this is alignment left, center, right. And this is top, middle, bottom. So it looks like it's that way. And then I don't know what size they made it, but then, and we can use a fill color. So there you go. So that's doing wraps, and we could do the same thing with soups. I'll center it this way, center it that way, and I will format it so the text rotates up, and then maybe increase the size and then change it to blue or whatever. So that's rotating the text and using merge. Also, sometimes you'll see the rotate text on dates to try and make it fit a little more narrow in a column. And the next thing I want to show you in here is a little bit about borders. So Notice this border down here is a little bit darker. In fact, maybe this picture is kind of hard to tell. Let's assume that the border above the word Caesar all the way across and the border below strawberry all the way across is a little bit bolder. And so I run up here and I am going to do that. And what I do is select these cells. And the point I want to make about borders is when you use this button, there's all these different kinds of borders. It is going to apply that border to your selection. So in other words, if you select that, it's going to put borders around that. If I select a single cell, it'll put borders around that. So if I select that big block and I want a thick border all the way around it, I can hit thick outside border and it puts it all the way around that. Let's say I made a mistake and I'm like, oh, I didn't mean that to be thick. I wanted it to be over here on this side of salads. All right, well then I could grab this and now watch this. You can go into this more borders and it kind of has a custom feature that's pretty handy. Right here on this is a picture of your selection, and notice on the right side of my selection it says you currently have a thick line. And I go, no, okay, I want that thick line to be here, and I want to click on this and that'll take that line away. But I can also say I want it up here and here. So in my selection I'm putting a border on top, on the left, and on that side. Now I'll hit OK. So now it has, you can't really see it because this is column A, but I fixed that mistake by redoing my selection and then getting into the custom border feature. If you want to change the color of the borders, so let's say I'm going to do sides and I want all of that to be a different color, right? We'll just grab a color. But I want to leave, remember this dark border we just put in? I want to leave that one alone. So I am going to go here and I'm going to go more borders. I'm leaving this one alone, but I want to put a big thick border on this side, up on the top and on the right, and I want it to be a different color. The first thing you do is choose your color, and so I will make it this green just so we can see it. All right, and now I can grab any one of these. Maybe I'll make it even thicker. I'll grab this one and I am going to click here, here, and here. I'm leaving that bottom border alone, but I'm on the left, top, and right of my selection. However, whatever you have selected, I'm going to hit OK. And now I have a green border there across the top and over to the side. So that's how you can change the colors of your borders. Okay, let's go to the next sheet and talk about borders a little bit more. Before we do, notice all of these grid lines, right? You have your columns, QRST, and your rows, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the grid lines. When I run to this documentation sheet, notice there is no grid lines. Well, how did they get rid of those? What it is anytime you fill cells with a color, it removes the grid lines. So if I run back here and fill these cells with this light blue color, the grid lines are gone. Now where a lot of people freak out is when you fill with the color white. All of a sudden you're going, whoa, all of a sudden they feel like their borders are gone when these aren't borders. There are no borders on these cells. Those are just the natural grid lines inside the worksheet. You just happen to have a white fill color. If I run up to the paint bucket and take out the fill, then those borders will show back up. Okay, so obviously because this is filled with green, somebody had to go in and put borders. And so what you can do to put in all those borders at once is hit the border button, and this is the all borders. It'll put them around all of the cells in your selection. So just for fun, let me take out the borders. I'll hit no border. And that's just the green fill. Now if I want to put those borders back, I'll run up here and hit all borders, and that puts all of those grid lines back in. Now what do I do if I want this border where it's not a square shape? Well, you're going to have to go to that custom border probably. So for instance, I could in one swoop here go ahead and put a thick outside border around that whole thing. But then obviously I didn't want this one. So then as you saw in the previous exercise, I can make that selection, go to my more borders and say I don't want those two. And now when I hit OK, I have that shape as we can see down here. So sometimes you have to be a little creative when you're working with borders. All right, enough about text and borders and rotating text. Let's go talk about numbers and dates, because that's the other kind of data that you put into cells. When you type a number in Excel, just type the number. You don't need to type commas and decimals you do decimals, commas and dollar signs and percentage symbols. Just type the number, because we will format the number to display what we want it to display. Now, for instance, if I want to display these as dollar values, there's two different ways to do that. One's called currency and one's called accounting. Right now, they're all, if you look here, it tells me they're what's called general. That's the default setting for all of Excel. If I run right here and say I want those to be accounting, watch what happens to this 0 value. All right, it goes to a dash. That's the way accounting format works, and all of the dollar signs line up. All right, so that's an accounting format. If I go to the currency format, the dollar signs, what I call float with the size of the number, and 0 becomes a 0. A lot of times I'll get students freaked out because they'll see this dash in their spreadsheet and they don't know how it got there. Well, what it is, if you look in the formula bars, is 0. It's just a 0 with an accounting format applied. So depending on, very often we'll use accounting, but sometimes currency, where you end up with the floating dollar sign, or the dollar sign floats right next to the number. If I want to put these back, I can take them and make it general. If these were percentages, I could just hit this percent symbol, or I can run here and hit percentage, and then it'll put the percent symbol there. You can also increase and decrease the decimal of a number right here. And this is very important to understand. What you see as a number isn't necessarily the value in the cell. So for instance, I'm going to type 45.2368994, something like that. Okay, so there's a value. I'm going to make it a number with 2 decimals. So here it says 0.24, and yet what's really in the cell is 0.23. If I increase the or decrease the decimal, goes to 0.2, there it's 45. I can increase it, and now the number changes. And so a lot of times you're going to see values on my spreadsheet and yours are different, and you're thinking you did something wrong when realistically it's just the display. And to make this even a little bit different, let's change this to be 8 and this to be 8. So now, see how it's 45.88? Now as I decrease the decimals, it's going to go 89, and then it's going to go 9, and then this will go to 46. So all of a sudden the cell says 46, and yet what's truly in there is 45.886894. And so you have to pay attention what's formatted versus what's truly in the cell. And it will come to bite you all the time, where you're thinking you have a wrong value and it's actually correct. You just have it formatted differently than maybe where you're looking. Now, I mentioned you don't need to type the percent. You don't need to type dollar signs. Take a look at this cell. Right now it's formatted as general. But if I type 50% and actually put in the percent symbol, and now I click on it, it all of a sudden went from general to percentage. And the same thing will happen if you type a dollar sign and then type $100, 0.00. It kind of recognizes that you want that to be currency, and it will go from general to currency. So if you do type those things, which I just recommend not, it's just easier to go up here, that will change the format of the cell. And the other part that's a little disconcerting is if I hit delete on that cell, click over here and come back, notice it's still currency even though there's nothing there. So the formatting of a cell stays with the cell. It doesn't get removed when you delete the data. So you have to be careful. If you want to remove the formatting of a cell, notice it's currency, you have to run to this eraser and say clear. Clear all will do it, but you can also just clear the formats. Same thing, if I want to just get rid of those percentages but keep the values, I can say clear formats. And now it's all back to general, it's not percentages. All right, let's move on to dates. This is kind of confusing for students, and that is because dates are actually just a number. And what it is, it's a number that represents how many days since January 1st, 1900. Of all the weird things, Excel doesn't deal with dates that are before January 1st, 1900. It starts January 1st, 1900, and every day since is simply one more value, right? So in other words, that's just a number. It's formatted as general. But if I format it as a short date, that's actually January 1st, 2020. Okay, if I go back to being a number, it's 43831. So January 1st, 2020 is 43,831 days since January 1st, 1900. Just to make a point, let me type a 5 right here. Okay, and now it's general. If I format that as a date, it's January 5th, 1900, right? 5 days since January 1st. So dates are simply, I'm going to hit delete, and I'm also going to clear the format. Dates are simply a number that's formatted as a date. It's no different than that 100 being a number that later I format as accounting and put a $sign there. Okay, so underneath that cell, if I format this as a short date, it is simply a number that's formatted to display as a date. Now the reason students don't recognize this very often is, see how this cell is general? Well, if I type 4/15/2019 and hit enter, that's a date. But guess what happened? It was formatted as a date, or it is formatted. It's no different than when we typed a percentage sign with our number that automatically formats as a percent. These automatically format as a date. And what goofs people up is, let's say I delete that, and remember the formatting stays with it. So that's formatted as a date. And 2 days later I come in and I just want to type a 10 in here. And you're like, what? Why is my 10 showing up as 1/10/1900? Well, at some point that cell got formatted as a date. You must have forgotten about it. And as you type a 10, it's going to go ahead and make it that date. And you're like, no, I just want it to be the number 10. So you need to reformat it to general. Now let's talk about time, because believe it or not, time, so we're talking like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, is also just a number. It's a fraction of a number. So if a day, right, a particular date is a number, well, that piece at the end is the part of a day. So in other words, a quarter of a day is 6 in the morning. Half a day is 12 p.m., 12 noon. 3/4 of a day is 6 p.m. All right, you get the idea? So if I take these things, which are just numbers, and I say, oh, no, really, those are time, it's going to make 6, 12, and 6 p.m. right there. There you go. So that's 6 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m. Again, you don't recognize that's how Excel is working, because see this generally formatted cell? If I run here and type 6:05 space PM, it will take that, and guess what it does? It automatically calls it custom, but it's a time format. And now if I take that time format and say, oh, let's make this general, there is the fraction of a day that is 6:05 p.m. Remember, 6 p.m. is 0.75. So this is 753 thousandths of a day is 6:05 p.m. So guess what happens if I take a date? Remember this date, January 1st, 2020? If I put a fraction on that, like say January, I'll just run up here and go we'll do 0.754. Okay. And now I convert that not just to a date. If I just do date, it just shows it as a date. But if I do a custom format, more number formats here, right? And I run down through this list. I have a date, but one of the choices is the date plus the time. So that's what I'm selecting and hit OK. Well, now I get January 1st, 6:05 p.m. because I've added that fraction to the day number. So now that you understand that a date is nothing more than a number, simply formatted as a date, it's easy to understand why I can subtract two dates. So let's go ahead and format this back as a date. I just took that fraction off. So we'll make that a short date. And then let's say I have another date, 4/15/2020, and I want to know how many days there are between these two dates. I'm just going to make them look the same. So I hit the format painter. All I have to do is take that date and minus that date. Because they're just two numbers, it's the same thing as simply subtracting the two numbers, and it will then give me the fact that there's 105 days between these two dates. And so if I need to know days, I will just do a simple subtraction between the two days. If I need to know how many months are between these two, well, then that's a different video. We have to do something different in order to calculate that. Okay, enough about dates. Let's talk about storing numbers as a piece of text. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say I have student IDs, right? And it's a numeric value. And I want to take an average of their 3 test scores. Well, right over here, I put my cursor, my active cell, and I choose the average function off AutoSum. When I do, it's guessing what I want to take an average of, and it's grabbing the student ID. And I'm like, no, I don't want the student ID. I just need these 3 test scores. So I'll select through those and hit enter. All right, no big deal. I get the right answer, but I did have to do that extra step of selecting those cells. So what I can do, and a lot of times Social Security numbers, student IDs, phone numbers, they may go in numeric, but they're really text as far as all intents and purposes. You aren't going to do math on student IDs or Social Security numbers. So what you can do before you type the number is you put a single tick in the cell, or a single apostrophe, right? It's the single quote right below the double quote. Then when you type a number, I don't know if I have the same number, but anyway, when you type a number, it puts that green triangle, which simply gives you a warning that says, uh-oh, that number is stored as text. Okay, and the other thing I will mention is text and numbers align differently in a cell. Numbers align to the right, text aligns to the left. And so you can tell, even without the green triangle, that this is acting as text because it's aligned to the left side of the cell. That's acting as a number because it's aligned to the right side of a cell. Same with all of these numbers are aligned right. But now watch what happens when I go to the AutoSum and hit the average function. It only tries to grab those 3 numbers because this is a piece of text. And so you hit enter and now it'll do it right. Okay, how did I do that? I just put a single apostrophe or a single quote in front of the number as you type it, and then it becomes a piece of text. Sometimes it's called numbers as labels. It becomes a label to that row, and that's how you do that. Finally, let's talk about autofill, because this is a feature that will speed up your typing immensely. And what do I mean by autofill? I type the word Jan right here. I'm going to select that cell, and every time you do make a selection on Excel, the active cell will have this teeny little box or little dot in the bottom right corner, okay? And you have to be very careful, because also notice what my cursor is. See the big white plus sign? All right, that's for selecting. The big white plus, if I hold down my mouse left button, is selecting, all right? And notice if I go to this border, I get a 4-headed arrow. That's for moving. So if I click and drag, well, now I'm moving it. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z for undo. And if I hold my cursor on that, it's a skinny plus. Or I've heard it called the angry rabbit because it's a crosshair. Get it? Crosshair. So anyway, notice with just a little movement of my mouse, I go from the crosshair to the 4-headed arrow, skinny, and then to a big plus. So you have to be very careful around here because you can end up doing 3 different things, from selecting to moving to autofill. That's what we want right now, is the autofill. I want that skinny plus. I click, and when I drag across, notice what it's doing is it fills in the months. And what's kind of cool, depending on how you started it, so that was abbreviated JAN, here it's completely spelled out, well then it will completely spell out those months. Kind of nice. It also works if you type a date like this. Notice it's formatted as a date. I can grab that, right, Skinny Plus, make sure you got the right thing. Then you drag across. Now this is interesting. Do I want to fill the year? Do I want it to go 20, 21, 22, 23, or am I after 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3? What it defaults to is the day. So notice I'm January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd, January 4th. But you get this autofill option button when you let go of the mouse, and if I hit this drop down, it says, well, I just filled the series, and you're like, yeah, it did days, right? So if I click on this, it does nothing because that's what it did anyway. But you could say fill the weekdays. That's kind of cool because I want to do Monday through Friday, but not Saturday and Sunday. So in a work environment, that happens a lot. So if I click on that, notice, and by the way, these hashtags simply means I don't have enough room in my column to display the date. But notice 1, 1, 2, 3, then it jumped to 6. So this must be a Friday, and that must be a Monday. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then it jumped to a Monday. So that's kind of handy. Let's do that again, and notice when I get the autofill options, I hit this. That was weekdays. I could also fill the months. So now I got 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, the beginning of every month, and the last one is to fill the years. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Kind of cool. All right. So that is using autofill for dates. You can also use it for numbers. And by the way, you've just seen me fill across every time. You can also fill down. You don't have to go across. So a lot of times, let's say I just want to count by 10. Uh-oh. So I just typed the 5. Why did it do that? Well, that goes back to our dates lecture. And that for whatever reason, that cell was formatted as a date. And I'm like, no, I just wanted it to be a 5. Because what I'm trying to do is count by 10 going down. So I'm going to put a 5 there and a 10 right there and select both of those. I need to select them both because what this does is establish a pattern of counting by 5. And now when I grab the Skinny Plus and drag down, it will continue that pattern of 5, 10, 15, 20. So in that case, I selected both cells, then grab it and drag down. And that will establish. So you can do that obviously by 5s, by 10s, by 100s, by odd numbers. If I want odd numbers, I would put a 1 and a 3. Oops. There we go again. That keeps turning into a date on me. So there's 1 and 3. I will select them both. Don't forget to select them both so that you establish that pattern. And then I can fill down and I'll just get my odd numbers there. So autofill is a quick way of getting data into your spreadsheet. So you want to be able to use that. The other thing I'll mention on autofill is I'm moving down to this data. If I do a sum function, so it's grabbing those values and summing them, I'll hit enter. Now I can grab that formula and use autofill to drag across, and it will take that formula and basically copy it. So in this class, you very often are typing a formula one time, and then you want to be able to drag it. So if you're typing a formula more than once, you're probably doing something wrong. You want to type it once and then copy it. Same thing, if I want to calculate the units sold, I'm going to take the starting inventory and add in the delivered and then subtract what the ending inventory is. I might have that math wrong. So it's going to be 310 units sold. It turned green because of some conditional formatting, which we'll talk about later. Anyway, so I have that formula. Okay, I want to copy that down. But notice what happens here. I'm going to drag that down, and it changed the formatting down here. All right, remember I had it gray with these borders. I don't want it to change that formatting, so I'm going to hit Control Z. When I hit the autofill button and drag that formula down, there is this option again. You click on it, and one of the choices, and it's kind of a good one, is to fill without formatting. So I'm going to click on that, and then it leaves that gray color and my borders alone. All right, so it moves this stuff down and then leaves that formatting there. So a lot of times when you're auto-filling, you may end up hitting this and then say, oh yeah, go ahead and fill, but don't fill the formatting because I already have this colored like I want it. Another classic example of that is if you have your spreadsheet where every other row is colored. Okay, so I'm going to go through and I'll fill them in kind of a light gray here. So your whole spreadsheet's formatted where every other row is colored. Well, if I take autofill and drag this down, it wipes out all of your banding, right? And so that's a classic time when you say, oh yeah, I want to fill that formula, but I don't want to fill the formatting. I want to leave every other row colored. All right, we're almost at the end of this video. I just want to mention a couple more things, and the first one is the Format Painter. I use this all the time, and basically what that does is copy formats from whatever cell or range of cells you have selected and applies it to other cells. So as you recognized hopefully throughout this video, there's a lot of formatting you can do. And so let's say I'm just going to kind of mess around here. I want to make this yellow. I maybe want to increase that number to have a couple decimal places in it. Just not that this makes any sense, but I'm going to make that a percentage value. Maybe on the whole thing, I will do some kind of top or bottom border under it. Anyway, all of that formatting that I've just done, I want to be able to apply to another row. So what I can do is select the cells that have the formatting. So it can be a range of cells, it can be a single cell, whatever ones you want to copy the format, and you hit Format Painter. Now this is interesting. If you hit it once, you can apply it once. So in other words, I've selected that, I've got the paintbrush as a cursor, and I click and it applied that format to this range, but now it's done. It's all over, okay? I'm going to Control Z for undo. Here's the other thing you can do. So again, I'll select that. I can hit the paintbrush twice, and basically that turns it on. So now I can click here and the paintbrush stays there. I can click here, the paintbrush is still there. I can click here, which of course is going to change all of my dates. The paintbrush is on, and then when you're done formatting, in this case ruining my spreadsheet, I can now click on it and turn off the Format Painter. So that's a button I use quite a bit because I'll spend the time to make something look good, and then I want to apply it other places. The last thing I wanted to mention is everything I've shown you in this long video. Don't forget you have that little icon doohickey right in the bottom of these groups, and that basically provides a lot of plus additional features that you see in the buttons on that group. So here is all the different font things, and you have a strike through, a superscript, a subscript, which you don't have as buttons right there. If I click this alignment one, notice you have a tab called alignment. We just left the font tab. Well, here's an alignment. And here's your horizontal, your vertical, wrap text, shrink to fit, merge cells. Here's where you can rotate your text. All of those buttons are right here, but they're also inside of this alignment tab. Over here we were playing with numbers, accounting, percentage, comma, puts a comma in between your thousand separator. Well, you can also see that right here, plus you get the advantage of seeing the custom. And for instance on date, there's a lot more date formats than are what available with just the short drop down list. And so in here you can do date and time, you can do just the month and the day, and you kind of have to scroll through here to see all your possibilities. Same thing with accounting. Do you want a symbol? It defaults to none, but you have all of the different kinds of symbols for different currencies of the world. So just be aware that these buttons, I often go to those because they provide a lot more options than just the button you'll see on the outside of the group. All right, that's it. That was a long video, but I think it gives you a pretty thorough overview of all of the different ways to format your spreadsheets. And you want to get pretty familiar and pretty fast with this. And again, this should be review for the 125E class.